Eleanor Cross drove the seam ripper through her father's ledger. Not the fabric, not the silk, not the thread she had spent 24 years pulling through other women's wedding dresses, but the leather-bound book that contained the names of every man her father owned, every debt he had buried like a body, every transaction that had paid for the walls keeping her inside. The ink bled black across her fingers. She didn't stop. Outside, Deadwood roared with gold fever and gunpowder. Inside, a woman was finally learning the difference between a home and a prison. If you love stories about courage, survival, and love that refuses to kneel, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. This one does not end the way you expect. The morning Harlan Cross announced that he had found Eleanor a husband, she was on her knees on the floor of the shop, pinning the hem of Margaret Aldrich's wedding dress, while Margaret stood on the low wooden stool and talked about the man she loved. "He brought me wildflowers," Margaret said, her voice carrying that particular softness of someone who had never once been afraid of the person they were describing. "Can you believe that? In Deadwood, he found wildflowers." "Hold still," Ellie said quietly, pressing the pin through the silk without looking up. "Don't you think that's romantic?" "I think if you shift your weight again, I'm going to accidentally pin your ankle." Margaret laughed and steadied herself. She was 19 years old and utterly, completely safe in the knowledge that someone loved her. Ellie had been making dresses for women like Margaret her entire adult life. She knew the sound of that particular happiness the way she knew the weight of shears in her hand, completely, and from a careful distance. The bell above the shop door opened before she had finished the last pin. She knew it was her father before she looked up. She always knew. There was a particular quality to the silence that preceded Harlan Cross entering a room. The way sound itself seemed to pull back slightly. The way the air changed temperature. She had been reading these signs since she was a child. They had kept her safe more times than she could count. Or perhaps, she thought sometimes, they had kept her compliant, which was not the same thing at all. "Margaret," her father said, and his voice was warm and pleasant in the way that expensive things are pleasant. Designed to be admired, not touched. "You look absolutely beautiful. Eleanor does exceptional work." "Oh, Mr. Cross, she truly does," Margaret said. "I don't know what I would have done without her." "We're very fortunate to have her." He paused. "I need to borrow my daughter for a moment, if you don't mind. She'll be right back." It was not a question. It was never a question. Ellie set down the remaining pins carefully, smoothed her skirt, and stood. She followed her father into the back room, where the bolts of fabric were stored in ceiling-high shelves, and the smell of dye and beeswax was thick in the air. He closed the door behind them. Harlan Cross was a handsome man for 52, silver-haired, straight-backed, with the kind of face that inspired trust in people who did not know how to look carefully. He had the politician's gift of appearing to mean every word he said. Ellie had spent 24 years learning to read what lay beneath the words, and what lay beneath them now, as he turned to face her with that particular careful smile, was something she had not seen before. Satisfaction. "I had a very productive meeting this morning," he said. "I'm glad to hear it. With Arthur Drummond." The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ellie kept her face absolutely composed. Arthur Drummond was 61 years old, a widower twice over, and one of the wealthiest men operating in the Dakota Territory. He owned 3 mining claims and a significant portion of Deadwood's Central Street. He was also the kind of man who, when he looked at Ellie, looked at her in a way that made her want to stand with her back against a wall. "Is that so?" she said. "He's expressed a serious interest in you." Her father's tone was conversational, the way he might discuss a favorable trade on lumber. He's prepared to cancel the Garfield debt in full in exchange for the arrangement. That's nearly $400, Eleanor. It would clear the books entirely. The Garfield debt. She knew it. She knew all of them. She had memorized his books, quietly, over years, committing names and numbers to memory, the way she had once committed Bible verses. James Garfield was a miner with 3 children and a wife who coughed through the winters. He had borrowed money from her father 18 months ago when his primary claim flooded. The interest had been accumulating at a rate that made repayment mathematically impossible. "You want to sell me to Arthur Drummond," Ellie said, "to cancel a debt James Garfield owes you." "I want to see you settled," her father said. "You're 24 years old. Drummond is a stable man with established means. You would be provided for." "James Garfield would be provided for," she said. "That's the trade you're describing." For just a moment, one fraction of a second, something moved behind her father's eyes. Not anger. Her father rarely showed anger directly. It was something colder than that. A recalibration. A reassessment of the distance between what she knew and what he believed she knew. "It is a beneficial arrangement for multiple parties," he said. "Drummond wants an answer by Friday." "It's Monday," Ellie said. "Yes," her father agreed pleasantly. "So you have a few days to make your peace with it." He opened the door back to the shop and left her standing among the bolts of fabric. She stood there for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back to finish Margaret Aldrich's hem. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the room at the top of the house. Her room. The room she had occupied for 24 years, with its single window that faced the back alley and its door that did not lock from the inside. And she stared at the ceiling and performed arithmetic. 4 days. She had 4 days. She had been building her case against her father for 14 months. 19 names, amounts borrowed, interest charged, collateral seized. 2 instances where the collateral had been a person. A girl named Clara, 17, traded to a man passing through on his way to Cheyenne, who had not been seen since. A boy, 16, indentured to a mining operation upriver for a debt his dead father had left behind. She had sent 3 letters to the marshal's office in Cheyenne over the past year. 2 had received no response. The 3rd had received a reply so vague it might as well have been a refusal. She was one woman, making accusations against one of the most financially entrenched men in a territory that did not yet have proper courts or enforceable law. And she had learned, slowly and completely, that she was on her own. Until she had enough. Until the case was so airtight that no one could dismiss it. She needed more time. She did not have more time. She rose before dawn, dressed without lighting the lamp, and went downstairs. The shop was dark and quiet. She moved through it from memory, past the dress forms and the cutting table and the shelves of notions, to the locked drawer in the back of her father's desk where she knew, because she had watched him carefully over years. He kept the current ledger. She did not have a key. She had, however, been watching locks her entire life. The hairpin took 4 minutes. The lock turned. She opened the ledger and began to read by the thin gray light beginning to seep under the door. She was so deep in the columns of numbers that she didn't hear the boot on the porch step until it was directly outside the window. She closed the ledger and pressed flat against the desk in one motion, her heart slamming. The front door of the shop was locked. She had checked it herself. The window. The window was latched, but the latch was old, and the wood had swollen with last winter's moisture, and she had noticed, 3 weeks ago, that it did not sit quite flush in its frame. The window pushed open. A man came through it. He was large. That was her first impression, and then, immediately, quiet for his size, careful, someone who was accustomed to entering spaces where he was not necessarily welcome. He had dark hair, a few days of beard, and he was dressed for working. Heavy canvas trousers, a shirt with the sleeves rolled, leather gloves tucked into his belt. He straightened up once he was inside and stood absolutely still for a moment, listening. Ellie had the seam ripper in her hand. She did not remember picking it up. "I'm armed," she said clearly into the dark. The man went very still. Then he said, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to make any sudden movements, "That's fair." "Who are you?" "Wade Callister. I'm the blacksmith on Sherman Street." A pause. "I know this looks bad." "It looks like you climbed through my window at 4 a.m. "Yeah." Another pause. "That's accurate." "What do you want?" "I came for the ledger." The silence that followed was absolute. Ellie's grip on the seam ripper tightened until the metal edge bit into her palm. "Say that again," she said. "The ledger your father keeps in that desk." Wade Callister had not moved. He was holding himself the way a man holds himself when he is trying very hard to appear unthreatening. "I know it sounds insane. I can explain." "You have about 30 seconds before I start screaming." "I'm a witness," he said, "in a federal case being built in Cheyenne against a man named Reeves, Gerald Reeves. He's running money through your father's operation. Your father is not the top of this, miss. He's the middle. Reeves is the top. And I've been waiting 8 months in this town for the marshal to move, and the marshal isn't moving because he doesn't have enough. And I went through every option I had, and the one piece of paper that would connect Reeves directly to the transfers in this territory is in that ledger right there, and I need it." Ellie stared at him across the darkness. "Gerald Reeves," she said slowly. "You know him?" "He passed through Deadwood 11 months ago. My father hosted a dinner." She paused. "I served the food." Something shifted in Wade Callister's expression. Even in the low light, she could see it. A recalibration, a reassessment. Something that looked almost like recognition. "What's your name?" he said. "Eleanor Cross." "Harlan Cross is your father?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "How long have you been building your own case against him?" The question knocked the air out of her chest. Not because it was aggressive. It wasn't. It was quiet and direct. And it landed with the precision of something thrown by someone who knew exactly where the bruise was. 14 months, she said. Wade Callister exhaled slowly. He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, a gesture that looked less like frustration and more like a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the situation he had walked into. "Okay," he said. "We have a problem." "We have several problems," Ellie said. "The first one is that you're in my father's shop at 4 a.m, and if he finds you here, you're dead. The second one is that I have 4 days before he trades me to Arthur Drummond to settle a debt. The third one is that you apparently need the same evidence I need, and we've both been working toward the same thing for over a year without knowing it." She paused. "Do you want to keep listing them, or do you want to think about what to do next?" He looked at her steadily across the dark shop for a long moment. "You said 4 days," he said. "Friday. He wants an answer by Friday." "And Drummond, is this a—" "My father told me this morning. He called it a beneficial arrangement." Wade's jaw tightened. "What do you call it?" "I call it something I am not going to let happen." She set the seam ripper down on the desk. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "I've been building this case for 14 months, and I'm not finished. I need more time. I don't have more time. And now you're telling me that the man at the top of everything my father is doing is someone who has a federal case being built against him, which means there are people with actual legal authority who want him prosecuted, and the only reason it hasn't moved is that nobody has the connecting evidence. She looked at him. Is that what you're telling me? Yes, Wade said. Then what's in that ledger isn't just enough to expose my father, Ellie said. It's enough to bring down Reeves. If it has what I think it has, yes. She looked at the desk. She looked at the ledger she had put back in its place when he came through the window. I can't take it, she said. If it disappears, he'll know someone took it, and he'll know it was me. And then I'm not safe, and neither is anything else I've gathered. Can you copy it? I have been copying it, she said. Pieces of it. Over 14 months. But I haven't gotten to the Reeves transfers yet. He brought that ledger home from a meeting 3 weeks ago, and I've been waiting for the right moment. Wade Callister was quiet. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. It was not pity, which she had expected from a man learning about her situation. And it was not the particular uncomfortable sympathy that people offered when they were really only relieved the bad thing had not happened to them. It was something more like respect, which she had not expected, and which she was not entirely sure what to do with. 4 days, he said again, quietly. 4 days. Then we need to do this tonight, before you run out of time. Ellie looked at the window he had come through. Then she looked at the ledger. Then she looked at this stranger standing in her father's shop in the dark, who had arrived looking for the same thing she had been looking for, and who had somehow, in the space of 7 minutes, become the most useful person she had encountered in over a year. How did you know about the ledger? She said. Ruth Abernathy. She blinked. Ruth, of course. Ruth had known for months that Ellie was gathering information. Ruth, who ran the only respectable boarding house in Deadwood, and who had been one of her father's victims years ago, and who had rebuilt herself with a particular quiet fury that Ellie had always admired. Ruth had sent this man to her. She trusts you? Ellie asked. She trusts me enough, Wade said. That's her words, not mine. Ellie reached into the pocket of her skirt and removed the small key she had carried there for 3 weeks, waiting for the right night. She set it on the desk beside the seam ripper. I found the spare, she said. He doesn't know I have it. We use it tonight. You get what you came for. It goes back before morning. Wade looked at the key. He looked at her. You've been planning this for a while, he said. I've been planning a lot of things for a while, Ellie said. I just ran out of time to do them slowly. She picked up the key and unlocked the drawer properly this time. She opened the ledger to the Reeves transfers. She knew the pages. She had been reading them in her mind for weeks, and laid it flat on the desk. You have good light? She asked. Wade reached into his shirt and produced a small folded paper and a stub of pencil. He pulled a chair to the desk without asking, sat down, and began to copy. Ellie stood watch at the window. Outside, Deadwood was quiet. The saloons had finally gone silent somewhere around 3 in the morning. The street was empty in the gray pre-dawn except for a dog moving along the far wall of the livery and, once, the distant sound of boots on the boardwalk 2 streets over, that faded and did not come closer. You're not scared, Wade said without looking up from the page. I'm terrified, Ellie said. You don't look it. I've had a lot of practice not looking it. She watched the empty street. How long have you been in Deadwood? 8 months. And before that? Wyoming mostly. Before that, Kansas. Before that, Missouri. A pause, the scratch of pencil. I don't stay in places long as a rule. Why are you staying for this? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, a friend of mine was killed by Reeves 3 years ago. Thomas was his name. Another pause. He just happened to be standing next to me when I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And Reeves decided that was enough reason. Ellie said nothing. She understood the weight of carrying something like that. The specific guilt of a harm that happened adjacent to you, because of you, that you could not undo. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah." The pencil kept moving. "He was a good man. Better than me, if I'm honest. Is that why you're doing this?" "Partly." He turned a page. "Partly, I just can't stand a man like Reeves walking around free. It offends me." Despite everything, the darkness, the stolen ledger, the 4 days ticking down like a clock she could not stop, Ellie felt the corner of her mouth move. "That's honest," she said. "I try to be." The copying took 40 minutes. When he was done, he folded the papers carefully and tucked them back inside his shirt. Ellie locked the drawer, replaced the hairpin she had used on the lock so it sat exactly where it had been, and relocked the shop door from the inside. They stood facing each other in the lightning dark. "This goes to the marshal's office in Cheyenne," Wade said. "Combined with what I have, combined with what you have, it should be enough. But it has to move fast, and the marshal there has to be pushed. These men don't move unless they're pushed." "I know a lawyer in Carson City," Ellie said. "He's corresponded with me twice. He's legitimate. I checked." Wade raised an eyebrow. "You checked?" "I wrote to 3 people who had worked with him. I verified his responses independently." She met his look. "I told you. I've been doing this for 14 months. I've been careful." "You have been," he agreed. Something moved in his expression again. That same quality she had seen before. The recognition, the respect, the things she didn't quite know how to name. "But careful doesn't solve the 4-day problem." "No," Ellie said. "It doesn't." He looked at her for a moment. Outside, somewhere down the street, a rooster began its ridiculous announcement of the dawn. "I need to think," Wade said, "and you need to be back upstairs before your father wakes up." He moved toward the window. Then he stopped. "Miss Cross." "Eleanor," she said. "Ellie." He nodded once. "Ellie, for what it's worth, what you've built here, what you've done alone for 14 months, that took more courage than most people I've known." She looked at him steadily. "Don't tell me I'm brave," she said. "Help me finish it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "That I can do." He went back out through the window. She latched it behind him, checked that it sat flush, and walked quietly through the shop and up the stairs in the early gray light. She lay back down on her bed. She did not sleep. But something had shifted in the calculus of the last 24 hours. Some variable she hadn't accounted for. Some factor she hadn't known was missing. She had been alone in this for 14 months. She was not alone anymore. Outside the window, Deadwood was waking up, gold-hungry and lawless and indifferent to the lives lived inside its walls. Her father was sleeping 2 doors down. Arthur Drummond was expecting an answer by Friday. Gerald Reeves was somewhere between here and Cheyenne, untouched, believing himself safe. And Eleanor Cross lay in the gray morning light with her father's numbers memorized, and a stranger's honest eyes still clear in her mind. And for the first time in 14 months, she let herself believe that Friday might not be the end of her story. It might be the beginning of something else entirely. She found Ruth Abernathy at 6 in the morning, before the boarding house breakfast was served, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the particular expression of someone who had been expecting a visitor and was mildly irritated it had taken this long. "You sent him to me," Ellie said, closing the kitchen door behind her. "I sent him to the shop," Ruth said. "I didn't know you'd be in it at 4 in the morning." She poured a second cup and pushed it across the table without being asked. "Sit down. You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." Ellie sat. The coffee was strong and bitter, and exactly what she needed. "How long have you known him?" "Wade came to me 6 weeks after he arrived in town. He was asking questions about your father. Careful questions. The kind a man asks when he already knows most of the answers, and is just confirming details." Ruth wrapped both hands around her cup. "I told him I didn't talk about Harlan Cross to strangers. He came back 3 more times over the next 2 months. Each time I told him the same thing. The 4th time, he told me about Thomas Reeve and why he was here, and I believed him." She paused. "I don't believe men easily, as a rule." "I know," Ellie said. "He's not looking for glory or money or a reputation. He's looking to keep a promise to a dead man." Ruth looked at her directly. "Those are the most reliable kind of men there are, in my experience. The ones who are keeping promises to people who can't hold them accountable anymore." Ellie turned the cup in her hands. "He told me about Reeves, about the connection to my father." "I know. I told him to." "You could have told me." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "I wasn't sure you'd trust it coming from me. You trust evidence. You trust documentation. You trust things you've verified yourself." She set down her cup. "I thought if he came to you with what he needed, you'd see the connection yourself." I was right. Ellie couldn't argue with that. It was accurate in a way that was faintly uncomfortable. The portrait of a woman so accustomed to trusting only herself that even kindness had to be delivered indirectly to get through the door. "My father wants an answer for Drummond by Friday," she said. Ruth's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went very still. "Arthur Drummond, to settle the Garfield debt. James Garfield has 3 children." "I know." Ruth stood up and went to the window that faced the backyard, her back to Ellie, her shoulders straight and rigid. She stood there long enough that the silence became its own kind of statement. Ruth had been through her own version of this, not exactly the same, but close enough that she never spoke about it and didn't need to. The details lived in the particular way she held herself when Harlan Cross's name came up, in the care she took to build her boarding house into something no man could take from her. 4 days, Ruth said finally, still facing the window. "Yes." "Then we don't have time to be careful anymore." She turned around. Her face had settled into something resolved and hard. "What do you need?" "I need to get what I've gathered out of this town and into the right hands before Friday. Wade has the Reeves transfer records. I have 14 months of documentation. Combined, it should be enough to force the marshal's office to move." Ellie set down her cup. "But I also need to be somewhere my father cannot reach me when it does." Ruth nodded slowly. "There's a supply wagon leaving for Cheyenne Thursday morning. Bert Halliday drives it. He owes me a considerable favor, and he doesn't ask questions." She paused. "It's not comfortable." "I don't need comfortable," Ellie said. "I need Thursday." "I'll talk to Bert today." Ruth sat back down. "What about Callister?" Ellie thought about the way he had sat at the desk in the dark, copying numbers in a careful hand, asking about Thomas with that particular flatness in his voice that people use when they are describing something that still hurts, but they have decided the hurt does not get to stop the work. "He has his own reasons for getting this to Cheyenne," she said. "I think our directions happen to be the same." "That's one way to describe it," Ruth said, and there was something careful in her tone that Ellie chose not to examine too closely. She was back in the shop before 7, standing at the cutting table with a bolt of green wool, when her father came downstairs. He moved through his morning routine with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never had reason to rush. Coffee, the newspaper that arrived twice weekly from Yankton, A review of the accounts he kept openly in the front desk drawer. The ones that showed a perfectly ordinary lending business with perfectly reasonable rates. He paused in the doorway to the shop. "You're up early," he said. "Mrs. Hennessy needs her coat altered by Wednesday," Ellie said, not looking up from the fabric. "The seams need to come in at least 2 inches. She's lost weight." Her father watched her for a moment, with that particular quality of attention he had. The measuring kind. The kind that was always calculating the distance between what he knew and what he suspected. "Have you given any more thought to what we discussed yesterday?" "I've thought about it," Ellie said. "And?" She looked up then, and met his eyes, and said with complete steadiness, "I'd like until Friday, as you offered." Whatever he had been expecting, resistance, tears, another argument, it was not that. The careful smile returned, satisfied. "Of course," he said. "That's entirely reasonable." He went back to his coffee and his newspaper. Ellie went back to her coving. Her hands did not shake. She had spent 24 years learning how to keep her hands from shaking. Wade found her at noon. She was crossing the main street on her way back from delivering the Hennessy coat, carrying an empty basket, when he fell into step beside her from the direction of the livery, without announcement or preamble, as if they were resuming a conversation rather than beginning one. "I talked to Deputy Hargrove this morning," he said, his voice low and level, pitched for her ears only. "And?" "And he already knows. Not all of it. He doesn't know about Reeves, but he knows about the debt arrangements and the collateral seizures. He's known for at least 6 months." A pause. "He's not going to move on his own." Ellie kept walking. "He's afraid of my father." "He owes your father money. I found that out this morning from 2 separate sources. $300, borrowed 18 months ago when his wife was sick." Wade adjusted his stride to match hers without appearing to. A small, unconscious courtesy, she noticed. "Hargrove's not corrupt, exactly. He's just trapped. Your father has a gift for putting men in positions where doing the right thing costs them everything." "I know," Ellie said. "He's been doing it for 20 years. She shifted the basket to her other arm. "Hargrove being trapped doesn't surprise me. What it means is that we can't use local law enforcement as leverage, which I already assumed. We need this to go to Cheyenne directly." "There's a problem with that." She glanced at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw set in the way she was already beginning to recognize as the expression he wore when he was about to say something he didn't want to say. "Reeves has a man in Deadwood," Wade said. "Has had for at least 2 months. I spotted him 3 weeks ago. I know his face from Cheyenne. His name is Doyle. He's been watching me." A pause. "I think he's been watching you, too. Not closely. Your father's name protects you to some extent. But when things start moving, if Reeves gets word before the marshal acts, Doyle becomes a problem." Ellie processed this without breaking stride. How much of a problem? The kind that carries a gun and doesn't ask questions first. She turned that over in her mind. The basket on her arm felt heavier than it was. She had been afraid before. She was intimately acquainted with a particular texture of fear, had been navigating it since childhood. But this was a different calibration of it. This was not the fear of her father's cold anger, or Arthur Drummond's ownership, or the slow suffocation of a life controlled down to the smallest detail. This was the sharper fear of immediate physical danger, and she was surprised to find that it was, in some ways, easier to hold. It had edges. It could be planned around. "Then we need to move the documents tonight," she said. Wade stopped walking. She stopped with him, and they stood on the edge of the boardwalk in the noon sun, with the noise of Deadwood moving around them. Boots on planking, a mule complaining somewhere to the left, the distant percussion of the stamp mills processing ore up on the hill. "You just decided that," he said. "I decided it while you were talking." She met his eyes. "Thursday is too late if Doyle is watching. Tonight is safer than tomorrow. We get everything to Ruth's, we package it properly, and when Bert Halliday's wagon leaves Thursday morning, the documents go on it even if we're not on it yet. The evidence moves independently of us." She paused. "That way, even if something goes wrong on our end, the case still reaches Cheyenne." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression that she had started to watch for without entirely meaning to. That particular quality of attention he gave her, which was different from the way most people looked at her. Most people looked at Ellie Cross and saw Harlan's daughter, the seamstress, the quiet, well-behaved woman who kept her father's shop running and never caused trouble. Wade Callister looked at her like he was watching someone work, like he was genuinely interested in how her mind moved. "Where are your documents now?" he said. "Hidden in the shop. There's a hollow in the wall behind the third shelf of fabric bolts. My grandfather built the shop, and he built a cavity in the north wall for valuables. My father doesn't know about it. I found it when I was 11. She held his gaze. 14 months of records, names, dates, amounts, collateral seized. 3 witness statements I took down myself from people willing to speak privately, but not publicly. The letter from the lawyer in Carson City." She paused. "And a statement from a woman who saw my father with Clara Dawson. The girl he—" She stopped, restarted. "The girl who disappeared." Something moved in Wade's expression. Not pity. She was grateful it wasn't pity. It was something harder and quieter than that. "How old is that witness?" he said. 53. Her name is Agnes Voss. She runs the laundry on the south end of town. She watched my father put Clara in a wagon with 2 of Reeves's men. She wrote it down herself in her own hand because I asked her to, and she signed it." Ellie's voice was steady. "I promised her I would do something with it. That was 9 months ago. I have not forgotten." "No," Wade said quietly. "I don't think you forget anything." She didn't answer that. Instead, "Can you be at the north side of the building at 10 tonight?" "Yes." "Come around through the alley. There's a loose board in the back fence, 3rd from the gatepost. I'll meet you there." He nodded. They stood there for another moment in the noon sun, close enough that she could see the scar along his jaw clearly. A clean, old line, long-healed. She wondered about it, and then decided she would ask him later, at some point when there was a later to speak of. "Ellie," he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the formal preceding it, and it landed differently than she expected. Not intrusively, just differently, like something that had shifted slightly into place. "If this goes wrong," he said, "if something happens tonight or between now and Thursday, you get to Ruth's. Don't go back to the shop. Don't go back to your father's house. You get to Ruth's and you stay there. Bert Halliday's wagon leaves at 6 in the morning, regardless of anything else." He paused. "The evidence matters more than either of us. But so do you." She looked at him steadily. "Don't tell me to run," she said. "I'm not. I'm telling you the contingency." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." There was. She acknowledged that with a small nod. 10 o'clock, she said. "North Alley, 3rd board from the gatepost. I'll be there." She walked back to the shop. She did not look back, but she was aware of him standing on the boardwalk behind her for several seconds, before she heard his boots move off in the other direction. The afternoon passed with the grinding slowness of afternoons that carry weight. She altered 2 more garments, quoted a price on curtain fabric for a woman newly arrived from Illinois, who was determined to make her rented room habitable, and served 3 customers with her father in the front of the shop, playing the role she had been playing her entire life. Pleasant, competent, contained. At 4 o'clock, Arthur Drummond came in. He did not buy anything. He never bought anything. He wasn't the kind of man who came to seamstresses for himself. He came to look at her, which he did with the particular entitled openness of a man who has been told something belongs to him and is examining his acquisition. He was heavy-built, gray-bearded, with small eyes that moved over her in a way that made her feel like inventory. "Miss Cross," he said, tipping his hat, "a pleasure as always." "Mr. Drummond," she kept her voice even, "is there something I can help you with today?" "Just passing through." He glanced at her father, who was behind the counter, and the look that passed between them was the look of 2 men confirming an arrangement. "I understand we may be seeing more of each other in the near future." Ellie smiled the way she had been trained to smile, warm enough to be polite, closed enough to give nothing away. "Deadwood is a small town," she said. Drummond chuckled, satisfied with something in her response that she had not intended to offer, and left. The moment the door closed, her father looked at her with an expression that was as close to approval as he ever came. "Well handled," he said. "Thank you," Ellie said, and turned back to her work. That evening, she ate dinner across the table from her father, who spoke about a timber contract he was negotiating, and she listened, and responded, and passed the bread, and behaved in every observable way like a woman who had made her peace with things. After dinner, she read by the lamp for an hour. At 9:30, she said she was tired and went upstairs. She did not undress. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house. Her father's boots on the stairs at 10:15, the settling quiet of his room, the particular rhythm of a household going to sleep. At 10 minutes to 10, she went out through her window, down the back of the building by way of the narrow ledge and the rain barrel she had mapped in her mind years ago as a route she might someday need, and moved through the dark alley toward the north side of the building. Wade was already there, standing quiet against the fence in the shadow. He didn't speak when she appeared, just watched her come toward him with that steady, unhurried attention, and stepped aside to let her reach the loose board. She pulled it free, reached into the cavity behind the shelf inside, and began passing him the documents, one rolled bundle at a time. He took each one carefully and stowed it in the oilskin bag he carried, a bag she noticed was already partially full with his own papers. It took 12 minutes. When the cavity was empty, she replaced the board, and they moved together through the alley toward Ruth's. Neither of them spoke until they were inside Ruth's kitchen, with the door locked and the lamp lit low. Ruth unrolled the first bundle, spread it on the table, and read for 60 seconds with the swift, focused attention of a woman who had kept books of her own. Then she looked up. "This is enough," she said. "This is more than enough." "Combined with what he has," Ellie said. "Combined with what he has, yes. But even alone—" Ruth tapped the page. "This is a criminal case, Eleanor. A real one." Something moved in her expression that Ellie had never seen on Ruth's face before. Something that looked almost like wonder. "You built a real case." Ellie looked at the papers spread across the kitchen table. 14 months of stolen minutes in steady hands, and the particular stubborn refusal to stop that had kept her moving long after logic might have told her to give up. "I promised Agnes Voss," she said simply. Ruth began organizing the documents with brisk, methodical hands. Wade sat across the table, and his eyes found Ellie's over the spread of papers, and he held her gaze for a moment, with that expression she was learning to read. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, but a solid and particular recognition. One wounded, steady thing acknowledging another. She looked away first, not because she wanted to, but because she was not yet sure what to do with being seen that clearly. And she had learned long ago that the things you are not sure of deserve to be approached with care. Outside, Deadwood went on being Deadwood, loud and lawless, and lit up with the fever of men who believed they were one strike away from everything they had ever wanted. Inside Ruth Abernathy's kitchen, 3 people sat around a table covered in evidence and made their plans. Thursday was 2 days away. Her father was sleeping 2 streets over, certain of his arrangements. Arthur Drummond was expecting an answer by Friday. Gerald Reeves was somewhere between here and Cheyenne, believing himself untouchable. And Eleanor Cross, for the first time in 24 years, was not alone. The plan was simple enough that it should have held. Bert Halliday would come to Ruth's back door at 5:30 Thursday morning. The documents, Ellie's 14 months of records, and Wade's Reeves transfer copies, wrapped in oilskin and sealed with wax, would go into the false bottom of his supply wagon beneath 300 pounds of flour sacks. Bert would deliver them to a lawyer named Price in Cheyenne, a man Ruth had used twice before, and trusted with a particular careful trust of someone who had verified that trust under pressure. Price would take them to the marshal's office directly, not by mail, not by messenger, in person, with his own hands, because men like Gerald Reeves had long arms, and the postal system in the Dakota Territory was not known for its discretion. Ellie and Wade would follow on Friday, separately, by different routes, after her father had his answer. The answer she planned to give him was not the one he was expecting. But by Friday, the documents would already be in Cheyenne, and Harlan Cross's ability to make consequences happen would be considerably diminished. That was the plan at 11 o'clock Tuesday night, sitting in Ruth's kitchen, with the lamp burning low and the organized evidence stacked neatly in its oilskin wrap on the table between them. By Wednesday noon, the plan had a problem. Ellie was in the shop, her hands moving through the automatic motions of hemming, when she heard the voices in the front. Her father's, and another she didn't recognize. Low, deliberate, with a particular flat quality that she associated with men who had learned to remove all expression from their speech, because expression was information, and information was leverage. She set down the fabric without sound and moved to the doorway. The man standing at her father's counter was medium height, gray-coated, with a forgettable face, and the kind of stillness that was not natural, but practiced. He was holding his hat in both hands, turning it slowly, the same slow rotation, the same interval, over and over. She watched his hands and understood, without being told, that the hat turning was not nervousness. It was patience. It was a man who was comfortable waiting. Doyle. She knew it the same way she knew her father's footstep on the stairs, not from evidence, but from the accumulated reading of a lifetime of careful observation. This was the man Wade had described, and he was standing in her father's shop, having a conversation with her father that she could not hear clearly enough to follow. She stepped back from the doorway before either of them looked her way, returned to the cutting table, and picked up her shears with hands that she forced to remain steady through an act of pure will. 3 minutes later, her father appeared in the doorway. "Eleanor!" His voice was its usual pleasant temperature. "Come say hello to Mr. Doyle. He's a business associate passing through." She came out to the front of the shop and shook Doyle's hand and said it was a pleasure, and listened to him say something polite and meaningless about what a fine establishment it was. His eyes moved over her once, briefly, with a professional quality that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with assessment. Then they moved on to the rest of the shop, the shelves, the back-room doorway, the window facing the street, and she understood that he was not here to meet her. He was cataloging. He left within 10 minutes. Her father watched him go with an expression she read as satisfied, and then returned to his accounts without comment. Ellie went back to her hemming and spent the next 2 hours thinking. She got to Ruth's at 4, between customers, with the excuse of a fabric delivery that Ruth had prearranged for exactly this kind of purpose. "Doyle was in the shop this morning," she said, the moment the back door closed behind her. Ruth went still. "With your father?" "They know each other. My father called him a business associate." She set down the bolt of fabric she had carried as cover. "He was looking at the shop. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the space, the shelves, the back room." Ruth sat down heavily. "He's looking for the documents. Or looking to confirm they're still there, which means Reeves already suspects something is moving." Ellie looked at her steadily. Someone talked. "Not from this end," Ruth said, with a certainty that Ellie believed. Ruth's silences were one of the few things she trusted absolutely. "Then it came from the Cheyenne end. Someone in the marshal's office, or someone near the lawyer Price, or—" She stopped. "Or it came from the transfers themselves. If Reeves has someone watching his own paper trail, and those records were copied last night, he may have already been alerted." She pressed her fingers against the table. "We can't wait until Thursday morning. Doyle is here now, and he's already looking. Bert can't move before Thursday. His contract with the supply company requires him to leave on schedule, or he forfeits the payment. Can he take the documents tonight, separate from the wagon? On his person?" Ruth thought about that. He'd need a reason to ride to Cheyenne tonight that his employer wouldn't question. "His sister lives in Cheyenne," Ellie said. Ruth looked at her. "I sewed a dress for a woman named Halliday last spring. She mentioned her brother drove supply wagons for the Deadwood route. It's the same man. I remember because she talked about him for 20 minutes. Ellie met Ruth's eyes. If his sister were suddenly ill, he'd need a message. "Yes." Ruth stood. "I can have that message written and delivered to Bert within the hour. He has a fast horse. He can be in Cheyenne by tomorrow morning if he rides through the night." She moved toward the writing desk. "But Eleanor, if Doyle is watching the shop, he may also be watching this building." "I know." Ellie was already thinking through it. "The documents can't come from here tonight. They need to move without being connected to either of us." She found Wade at the smithy on Sherman Street 40 minutes later, on the other side of a legitimate excuse. A pair of shears she had been meaning to have sharpened for a month, which she handed to the young apprentice with enough authority that he went to fetch his employer without question. Wade came out from the back, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. "Walk with me," she said quietly. "I need to have my shears sharpened, and apparently this takes several minutes." He understood. He fell into step beside her at the unhurried pace of a business transaction. And she told him about Doyle and her father and the timing problem in a low, even voice, while the town went about its noisy afternoon business around them. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she counted the steps between his silence and his response. "The documents are at Ruth's," he said. "Yes. Doyle doesn't know that yet. He was looking at the shop. He thinks they're still in the wall cavity." "Probably, but he'll figure out they're gone by tomorrow at the latest when he searches it." "Then tonight is the window." Wade turned the rag over in his hands. It was a thinking gesture, she had noticed, the hands staying occupied while the mind worked. How does the oilskin packet get from Ruth's kitchen to Bert Halliday without being connected to either of us? Ellie had been turning this over since she left Ruth's. "Agnes Voss," she said. Wade looked at her. "She gave me her statement 9 months ago, and she has been waiting since then. She knows what's at stake. She was the one who watched Clara Dawson be put in that wagon. She has her own reasons." Ellie kept her voice steady. "Her laundry is 2 streets from the livery where Bert keeps his horse. She can move through this town without anyone looking at her twice. A woman carrying laundry is invisible in Deadwood. You'd be asking her to take a real risk. I'd be asking her if she's willing. There's a difference." She glanced at him sideways. "You said that to me, I believe. About contingencies?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she registered it. "You pay attention," he said. "I told you. I don't forget anything." She went to Agnes Voss at 5 o'clock, alone, and sat across from the older woman in the back room of the laundry, where the steam from the vats made the air thick and close. Agnes listened to all of it without interrupting. She was a broad-shouldered woman, with gray-streaked hair and red hands from decades of work. And she had the quality Ellie most admired in people. The quality of hearing difficult information and processing it without flinching, without performing a reaction, just taking it in and turning it over and deciding. When Ellie finished, Agnes was quiet for 30 seconds. Then she said, "Clara Dawson had a younger brother, 8 years old when she disappeared. He's been living at the Hendersons' farm south of town ever since, working for his keep." She looked at Ellie directly. "I think about that boy every time I see him ride past on that cart." "I know," Ellie said. "Tell me where to go and what to carry." Agnes picked up a folded sheet from the pile beside her and began smoothing it with mechanical precision, her hands finding work automatically. "I've been waiting 9 months to do something that matters. I'd rather do it now than die waiting." The handoff happened at 7:30, in the narrow gap between the laundry and the cooper's shop, with the evening noise of Deadwood providing adequate cover. Ruth passed the oilskin package to Agnes, wrapped inside a delivery of clean linens for the boarding house, the kind of exchange that happened a dozen times a week between those two establishments, and would not register on any watching eye as out of the ordinary. Ellie was on the other side of town when it happened, in the shop, hemming another garment, visible and unremarkable, because the best alibi was the ordinary. Her father ate dinner that evening in high spirits. He had received some kind of favorable communication, she gathered, though he didn't say from whom. He talked about expansion plans, a second property he had his eye on, north of the main street, a possible arrangement with one of the mining companies that would solidify his position considerably. He talked about the future in the expansive way of men who believed their future was settled. Ellie passed the bread and said the chicken was very good, and asked a question about the northern property that kept him talking for another 10 minutes. And all the while, the clock on the mantel moved toward 8, then 8:30, then 9. By 9 o'clock, Bert Halliday was saddled and riding south toward Cheyenne, with an oilskin package against his chest, and a message in his pocket about his sister's sudden illness. She didn't know that with certainty. She was calculating probability, running the sequence in her mind. Agnes to Bert, Bert to horse, horse to road, and finding it held. Ruth was reliable. Agnes was reliable. Bert was reliable in the particular way that people are reliable when they are doing something that costs them, and they have chosen to do it anyway. Her father said goodnight at 10 and went upstairs. Ellie sat with her mending for another hour, listening to the house settle. And then she went to bed and lay in the dark and understood that the documents were gone now, out of her hands, moving toward Cheyenne at the speed of a good horse and a determined man, and that there was nothing more she could do about that part of it. What remained was the part that frightened her more. She was at Ruth's by 8 the next morning, and Wade was already there. He was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, and when she came in, he looked at her with the directness that she had come to recognize as simply how he looked at things, without deflection, without the social performance of looking slightly away. "Bert got out clean," Ruth said from the stove. "I had confirmation an hour ago from the livery boy. No one followed him. Ellie let out a breath she had been holding since the previous afternoon. Good. Doyle was at the shop, Wade said. He said it without preamble, which she had also come to expecting. No long approach. Just the fact. This morning, before you were up, I watched him go in the back. She had expected this. She had still been hoping she was wrong. Did he find the cavity? He was in there long enough. Wade set down his cup. He knows the documents are gone. How much time does that give us? He'll report to Reeves. Reeves will want to know where they went. That process takes time. Message out, response back. Possibly a day, possibly less if Reeves already has men closer than Cheyenne. He looked at her. What it means is that by tonight, possibly by this afternoon, Doyle stops looking and starts acting. Ruth set 3 plates on the table and said, "Sit down and eat, both of you. You can't think on empty." They sat. The food was good and solid, and Ellie ate it without tasting much of it, running the timeline in her mind. Bert riding south. Price in Cheyenne receiving the package. Price going to the marshal. The marshal, if he was going to move at all, moving toward Deadwood. How long did that take? A day and a half for the message, another day for a marshal with deputies to organize a ride north. Call it 3 days at the very best, if everything went perfectly, if Price acted immediately, if the marshal was already primed. 3 days. She had given herself until Friday. "He's going to come for me before the marshal gets here," she said. Wade looked up from his plate. He didn't contradict her or reassure her, because she had noticed he didn't do those things. He didn't tell people comfortable falsehoods just because the truth was hard. It was the quality she trusted most in him, and occasionally found difficult. "Probably," he said. "Not my father," she said. "Doyle." Ruth set down her fork. "My father still thinks he has until Friday," Ellie said. "He still thinks I'm going to comply." "He won't move against me directly until that deadline passes, because making a scene before Friday serves nothing. But Doyle doesn't care about my father's timeline. Doyle's operating on Reeves's timeline. And Reeves's timeline is, where did the documents go and who took them?" She looked at Wade. "He'll work backward to you, to Ruth, eventually to me." "Eventually isn't the concern," Wade said. "Today is the concern." "Yes." They looked at each other across Ruth's kitchen table. She had spent 24 years being careful. She had spent 14 months being methodical and patient and precise, building her case one piece at a time, protecting herself by being invisible, by being unremarkable, by being exactly what everyone in Deadwood expected Harlan Cross's quiet daughter to be. That strategy had kept her safe long enough to accomplish what she had accomplished. But it only worked while people were not yet certain about her. The moment Doyle confirmed the documents were gone and traced backward to their origin, invisibility was finished. The only question now was whether she moved first or waited to be moved. "I'm not going back to the shop," she said. The decision landed in the room with a particular finality. Not dramatic, just true. The way certain things become true the moment they are said aloud. Ruth nodded once. Wade held her gaze with that steady, undeflected attention. "My things are already gone," Ellie said. "Everything I care about was in that cavity, and it's in Cheyenne by now." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "The only thing left in that shop is fabric and thread and my father's carefully constructed version of my life. And I am done maintaining it." "Your father will know something is wrong the moment you don't come back," Wade said. "He'll move faster than Drummond's deadline." "I know." "And Harlan Cross moving fast changes the risk profile for everyone in this room." She looked at him directly. "I know that too. And I'm asking you." She stopped. Restarted, because she had made herself ask for things clearly, even when it cost her. "I'm asking for your help, not because you owe it to me, Because I'm asking. Something shifted in Wade Callister's face. Not the small, almost smile she had seen before. Not the careful respect. But something deeper and quieter that she did not have a name for yet, though she thought she might learn the name for it eventually, if they both survived the next 24 hours. He pushed back his chair and stood. "Then we're not waiting until Friday," he said. "We move today." Moving today meant moving before noon. Ruth understood this without being told. She was already on her feet before Wade finished the sentence, moving through the boarding house with the efficient purposefulness of a woman who had spent years preparing for contingencies she hoped would never come. She had a room at the back of the second floor that no one knew about except her. Not a registered room, not on any ledger. A room she had kept empty and stocked since the winter 2 years ago, when a woman had come to her door at midnight with a split lip and nowhere else to go. She had used it 3 times since then. She did not advertise its existence. "You stay there until dark," Ruth told Ellie, pressing a key into her hand. "Both of you. Top of the stairs, last door on the left. There's food on the shelf and a bolt on the inside. And the window looks onto the alley, not the street." "Ruth," Ellie started. "Don't thank me. Thank me when you're in Cheyenne." Ruth squeezed her hand once, hard, and let go. "Now go up before anyone sees you on the ground floor." They went up. The room was small and close, and smelled of cedar and old wool, and there was 1 chair and 1 narrow cot, and a shelf with dried beef and 2 apples, and a stoppered jug of water. And none of that mattered, because Ellie was not thinking about the room. She was thinking about the timeline. Wade stood at the window, off to one side, not visible from the street below, and watched the alley. She sat on the edge of the cot and thought out loud, because thinking out loud with someone who listened properly was something she had not had before and was still learning how to use. "My father will expect me in the shop by 8, she said. "When I don't come down, he'll wait 15 minutes before he checks my room. When my room is empty, he'll look in the shop. When I'm not in the shop, he'll start asking questions." She worked through the sequence precisely. "He'll go to the women he knows I talked to, Mrs. Hennessy, Margaret Aldrich's mother. They won't know anything. Eventually, he gets to Ruth." "And Ruth hasn't seen you?" Wade said, still watching the alley. "Ruth hasn't seen me since yesterday afternoon, when I picked up that fabric delivery." Ellie kept her voice level. He won't believe her entirely, but he has no reason to push past that, unless Doyle is already pointing him in this direction. "Doyle will point him here." Wade turned from the window. "Doyle knows the documents moved. He knows they didn't move alone. He'll have mapped every connection you have in this town by now. That's his job. Ruth is the obvious hub." He crossed to the chair and sat, forearms on his knees. "What changes is whether Doyle tells your father before or after he tells Reeves. Those are 2 different conversations, with 2 different outcomes. If he tells Reeves first, Reeves orders him to retrieve the documents or stop them." She looked at him. "But Bert is already most of the way to Cheyenne." "Which means the documents are past stopping. Which means the only thing Doyle can do for Reeves at that point is manage the damage." Wade's jaw was set. "And the way you manage the damage on something like this is you eliminate the witnesses." The word sat between them, plain and ugly. "Me," Ellie said. "You. Me. Agnes Voss, possibly, if he's traced back that far." He held her gaze without flinching. "I'm not saying this to frighten you. I know. You're saying it because it's the operational reality, and I need to understand it." She exhaled slowly through her nose. "Then we don't wait for dark." He looked at her. "Waiting for dark made sense when we had until Friday, and Doyle was only watching," she said. "That calculation is over. Every hour we stay in this room is an hour Doyle has to locate us and corner us somewhere with no exits. She stood. We need to move while we still choose when and where. Wade was quiet for a moment. She had come to understand that his silences were not hesitation. They were processing. The same thing she did when she ran through a calculation. He was not a slow thinker. He was a thorough one. "There are 2 horses at the livery that aren't connected to me," he said. "I've been paying the livery boy 3 cents a week for 2 months to keep a sorrel and a gray available. He thinks I'm eccentric. He doesn't ask why." He looked at her. "Can you ride?" "No," she said. "Not well." "Well enough to stay on at a controlled pace?" "I'll stay on," she said, in a tone that was not bravado, but simply a statement of what was going to be true, because she was going to make it true. He almost smiled at that. She was learning to see it coming, the very slight change around his eyes before the rest of his face committed to the expression. "Cheyenne is a day and a half south," he said. "Longer if we stay off the main road, which we should." "We should," she agreed. "I need 20 minutes at the smithy before we go. There are things I can't leave behind." He paused. "Letters. My own documentation of what I witnessed in Cheyenne 3 years ago. My statement about Thomas." He said the last name without inflection, but she heard what was underneath it. The same steady carrying of something heavy that she recognized from her own years of practice. "Without my statement, the documents you gathered lose half their connective tissue." "Then we get your letters." She looked at the door. "Can you get to the smithy without being seen from the street?" "If I go through the cooper's yard and along the back of the assay office." "How long?" 15 minutes if nothing goes wrong." "Go now," she said. "I'll be ready when you get back." He stood. He looked at her for a moment, with that direct, unhurried attention that she had stopped trying to deflect, and had simply started accepting as a feature of being in a room with Wade Callister. Then he said, "Don't open this door for anyone but me." "I know." "I mean it, Ellie. Not Ruth. Not anyone who says they're sent by Ruth. Just me." She met his eyes. "I said, I know." He left. She sat back down on the cot and listened to the sounds of the boarding house around her. Muffled voices from somewhere below. Footsteps in the hall that passed without pausing. The distant clang of the stamp mills on the hill that was so constant in Deadwood that silence would have been more alarming than noise. She thought about her father waking up this morning and going downstairs for his coffee and his newspaper, confident in his arrangements, certain of Friday's answer. She thought about the version of this morning that existed in his mind, Eleanor in the shop, needle in hand, accepting the shape of the life he had constructed for her, because she always had before. She had always given him that, she realized. Not compliance exactly. She had been working against him for 14 months. But the appearance of compliance, which had served her purpose and served his belief in his own authority simultaneously. And there was something painful in acknowledging that even her resistance had been shaped to fit inside the space he gave her. Every clever thing she had done, the cavity in the wall, the memorized accounts, the letters to Cheyenne, she had done in the dark, quietly, invisibly, making herself smaller and smaller to avoid being seen while she worked. She was tired of being small. The door opened at 16 minutes. She knew it was Wade before he spoke, because she had already learned the sound of his step, the slight unevenness from an old injury on the left side that she had noticed on the second day and filed away without comment. He came in with a canvas bag over one shoulder, and something in his expression that she read immediately as changed. "What happened?" she said. "Hargrove stopped me outside the smithy." He closed the door and bolted it. "Not hostile. Scared. He set the bag down. Doyle went to see him this morning. Told him there was a federal investigation moving toward Deadwood, and that anyone who had been obstructing it, failing to report known criminal activity, for instance, was going to be named in the filing. Ellie went very still. He threatened Hargrove. He told Hargrove that the cleanest way out was to cooperate with Reeves's people directly, meaning Doyle. Wade turned to face her. Hargrove came to me because he doesn't know what else to do. He's sitting on information from 6 months of watching your father's operation, and he's been afraid to use it. And now Doyle is telling him that his silence is going to be read as conspiracy, and he's going to prison with the rest of them. Is he right? Legally? Probably not. Hargrove's a coward, but he's not a criminal participant. But Hargrove doesn't know that, and Doyle is betting he won't find out until it's too late. He paused. I told Hargrove that if he wants to protect himself, the way he does it is by writing down everything he knows, signing it, and getting it to the same lawyer in Cheyenne that has the other documents. Ellie looked at him carefully. You told him about Price. I gave him the name and address. Nothing else. His expression was steady, unapologetic. He has information we don't. 6 months of first-hand observation from a man with a deputy's badge. That's worth something in a federal filing, Ellie. That's worth the risk of trusting him with the name. She turned this over. She would not have made that call herself. She would have said the risk was too high, that Hargrove was too compromised, that the information he held was not worth the exposure. She might have been wrong. She was honest enough with herself to admit that. Did he say he'd do it? She asked. He said he'd think about it. Wade picked up the canvas bag. Which means he'll probably do it. Men like Hargrove, who are afraid of their own shadows, think about things, until the thing they're afraid of becomes more frightening than the action, and then they act. He looked at her. We can't wait for him, but we don't need to. She nodded. Are we ready? Yes. He hesitated. Just briefly, barely long enough to register, but she registered everything. Your father came to the smithy this morning, before I got there. My apprentice told me. She felt the cold move through her chest like water under ice. What did he want? He was asking about me, who I was, how long I'd been in town, what he'd seen. Wade held her gaze. He knows. Not everything, she said. Her voice stayed steady. If he knew everything, he'd have gone to Doyle, not to the smithy. He suspects enough, and Harlan Cross acting on a suspicion is worse than Harlan Cross acting on a certainty, she said. I know. When he's certain, he plans. When he suspects, he reacts. She stood and picked up her shawl from the end of the cot. Then we leave now. Not in 20 minutes. Now. They went out through the back of the boarding house, through the yard where Ruth's laundry hung on the lines in the morning air, and through the gate into the alley that ran south toward the library. Ellie kept her pace even, her head down, the shawl over her hair, looking like every other woman in Deadwood going about her morning. Wade walked a step and a half behind her and to her left, in the particular position she had noticed he took whenever they were moving through the town together. Not beside her, not in front of her, but at the angle that placed him between her and the open street side. She doubted he was conscious of it. That was the kind of thing that came from instinct, not thought. The livery boy was 14 and gap-toothed, and took the coin Wade gave him with the blank-faced acceptance of a boy who had learned not to ask about the things adults did with horses at unusual hours. The sorrel was saddled first, and Wade helped Ellie up with his hands at her waist, steady and matter-of-fact, and she settled into the saddle and found her grip on the reins and did not let herself think about how unfamiliar it felt, because unfamiliar was just another word for new, and she was done being afraid of new things. Easy rein, Wade said, handing it up to her. She's gentle. Just sit straight and move with her. "I know," Ellie said. "You told me." He mounted the gray with the ease of someone who had spent years on horseback. They walked the horse out of the livery at the back gate, into the alley, turning south. They were 30 yards down the alley when she heard her father's voice. It came from behind them, from the direction of the street, not the alley. Not close enough to be a shout, but carrying, deliberate, with a particular edge she had spent 24 years recognizing. He was at the front of the livery. He had seen something, the livery boy, or the open back gate, or simply the right answer to his own morning of suspicious questions, and he was following it. "Keep moving," Wade said, quiet and level. "Don't look back." She didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward and urged the sorrel into a slightly faster walk, and kept her hands loose on the reins the way he had shown her, and thought about nothing except the next 10 yards of alley, and then the next 10 after that. She heard her father come through the back gate behind them. "Eleanor!" His voice was measured, still pleasant, the way it was always pleasant, temperature-controlled, designed to project complete authority without appearing to exert it. "Eleanor, stop." She didn't stop. "Eleanor, cross." The pleasantness was gone now, shed like a coat, and what was underneath it was the voice she had heard twice in 24 years when the performance fell away entirely, cold and absolute. "I am speaking to you." Wade turned the gray sideways, putting himself between her and the sound of her father's voice, and said without raising his own voice, "Mr. Cross, your daughter is leaving. That's not something that requires your permission." Silence. The particular quality of her father processing something that had not fit his model of the world. She had heard that silence before, too. Shorter, rarer. The silence of a man recalculating. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in," her father said. His voice had shifted again, lower now, the pleasantness entirely stripped. This was the voice that had no audience. "No idea what this will cost you." "I expect it'll cost me some," Wade said. "I've weighed that." "You've built nothing here. You're a drifter with a lease on a smithy. I can have you removed from this town before sundown." "You can try," Wade said, "but I'd be in Cheyenne by then." Another silence. Longer this time. Ellie kept moving. She did not look back. She heard Wade's gray fall into step behind her, then beside her, and they moved together out of the alley onto the road that led south, and the sound of Deadwood's morning noise came up around them, and her father's voice did not follow. She waited until they were 2 streets south of the livery before she let herself breathe. "He'll go to Doyle," she said. "Yes." Wade was riding beside her now, easy in the saddle, scanning the road ahead with steady eyes. "We have maybe an hour before Doyle is behind us." "Will he follow us out of town?" "Depends on what Reeves told him to do." He glanced at her. "If the order is to retrieve the documents, we're past that. If the order is to eliminate the witnesses—" He stopped. "Then yes," Ellie said. "Then yes." She absorbed that. The sorrel moved steadily beneath her, finding her rhythm, which was more forgiving than she had expected. The road ahead was empty in the thin morning light. Deadwood fell behind them, its noise and fever and gold-sick urgency receding, and she thought about all the mornings she had stood at the window of the shop and looked at this road, and understood in the abstract that it led somewhere else, that there was a world beyond the town limits she had never been permitted to reach. She was on it now. "Wade," she said. "Yeah?" "Thank you." She kept her eyes on the road. Not for today specifically. For coming through that window 3 nights ago. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him looking at her from the side without turning to verify it. "You'd have found another way," he said. "Maybe, but this one was faster." She paused. "And I was running out of time." "You weren't the only one," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not just about Cheyenne, or Reeves, or Thomas Reeves' debt that had to be paid. She recognized the sound of someone admitting, quietly and without ceremony, that something had shifted for them. She recognized it because she was listening carefully, and because she had felt the same shift herself. Somewhere in the space of 3 days and 4 in the morning decisions, and a man who told her the truth, even when it was hard. She didn't answer. She let it sit between them in the morning air, not ignored, not pressed, just present. The way things that are true can afford to be. Patient, neither demanding nor retreating. They were 3 miles out of Deadwood when she heard hoofbeats behind them. She did not have to ask. She felt Wade's posture change beside her. Not a flinch, not fear, but the specific sharpening of a man who has been waiting for a thing to arrive and is now making his calculations.
"How many?" she asked. He looked back once, briefly. 1.
"Doyle."
Too far to be sure, but yes, probably. He turned forward. "There's a cutoff 3 miles ahead. Breaks east into the hills. Longer route, but harder to follow, and we know it." He glanced at her. "You told me once you don't forget anything."
"Yes?"
2 nights ago at Ruth's, I showed you the territory map on the table for 6 minutes while Ruth was reorganizing the documents." He held her eyes for a moment. "Can you recall it?" She pulled the map up in her mind with the precision she had spent a lifetime cultivating. Every line, every marking, every fork in the road. She ran the eastern route in her memory, matched it against what she knew, found the point where it rejoined the main road south of the worst terrain. "I can recall it," she said. "Then you lead," he said simply. "I'll stay between you and what's behind us." She looked at the road ahead. She thought about all the things she had done in the dark, quietly, invisibly, in the borrowed margins of other people's plans for her life. She thought about 14 months of careful work, in Agnes Voss's red hands, and Clara Dawson's little brother working for his keep on a farm south of town. She thought about Bert Halliday riding through the night toward Cheyenne, with everything she had built pressed against his chest. Then she pressed her heels gently into the sorrel sides, felt the horse respond, and took the lead. The eastern cutoff was narrower than the map had suggested, a trail more than a road, carved by deer and prospectors rather than wagon wheels, threading through juniper and loose shale that made the horses pick their steps carefully. Ellie navigated from memory with a precision that surprised even herself, calling each turn before it appeared, reading the landscape against the image in her mind with the same focused attention she had given to her father's ledgers. Wade rode behind her and said nothing. He didn't need to. She could feel him back there, steady, watchful, the gray's hoofbeats a reliable rhythm at her back. And she understood that he had given her the lead not as a courtesy, but as a genuine assessment. He trusted her navigation. That trust was not a small thing. She had spent 24 years in a town where the people who claimed to be protecting her had actually been containing her. And the distinction between those two things had become so blurred she had almost stopped believing the difference existed. Wade Callister made the difference visible again, simply by acting on it without announcement. The hoofbeats behind them had faded after the first mile of the eastern trail. Either Doyle had missed the cutoff, or he had assessed the terrain and chosen to wait for the main road to converge again further south. Neither option was safe. Both options were better than the alternative. They rode for 2 hours in near silence before Ellie pulled up at a creek crossing to let the horses drink. She climbed down stiffly. Her legs had opinions about the last 2 hours that she chose to ignore, and crouched at the water's edge and cupped her hands and drank. The water was cold and tasted of rock and snowmelt and distance from Deadwood, which was the best thing she had ever tasted. Wade watered the gray,
and then came to crouch beside her. And they stayed like that for a moment, side by side at the creek, listening to the horses and the water and the very distant world going about its business without them. "You navigated that perfectly," he said. "I looked at the map for 6 minutes," she said. "I know. That's what I mean." She looked at the water moving over the rocks. "My father used to say I had a head for numbers and no head for anything else worth having." She said it without particular emotion, the way you state a fact that lost its power to wound somewhere along the way. He meant it as a limitation. I decided to use it as a tool. "He was wrong about most things," Wade said. "Yes." She stood and dried her hands on her skirt. "Most things." They pushed south through the afternoon, rejoining the main road at a point well ahead of where Doyle would have expected them to emerge. The land opened up as they descended out of the hills, the harsh broken terrain of the Black Hills giving way to the longer rolls of the high plains, and the sky above them became enormous in the way that skies become enormous when you have spent too long in a town that kept placing walls between you and the horizon. Ellie breathed it in. She didn't say anything about it, because there were no words adequate to 24 years of interior and the specific quality of open space after confinement. But she felt Wade glance at her once as the land opened up, and she thought he understood without being told. They made camp before dark, off the road behind a low ridge, a small fire that gave more warmth than light. Wade had dried beef and hardtack in the canvas bag, and Ellie had the 2 apples from Ruth's shelf, and they divided all of it with the practical equity of people who had stopped performing generosity and were simply sharing what there was. "Tell me about Thomas," she said when the fire had settled. He was quiet for a moment, turning a stick in his hands the way he turned the rag at the smithy when he was thinking. "We grew up together," he said. "Same street in Cheyenne, same schoolhouse. His mother taught piano, and she tried to teach me, and I was terrible at it. And Thomas thought that was the funniest thing he had ever seen." Something moved in his voice. Not grief exactly, but the tenderness that lives on the other side of grief after enough time has passed. "He was better at everything than me. Kinder, smarter, quicker to laugh. The kind of man who made other people feel like the best version of themselves just by being in the same room." He paused. "When I witnessed what I witnessed, Reeves giving the order, the man who carried it out, I knew immediately what it meant, what it was going to cost to do the right thing." He looked into the fire. "I didn't think it was going to cost Thomas. He wasn't involved. He just came to find me that night because I hadn't come home and he was worried. And Reeves's men saw him with me and decided that was enough." "I'm sorry," Ellie said. She had said it before, in Ruth's kitchen, but it bore repeating because it was true, and because some things deserved to be said more than once. "He had a girl he was going to marry," Wade said. "Sarah. She moved away after. I don't know where." He set the stick down. "I've thought about writing to her, to tell her that I didn't stop, that I'm still pushing it forward. But I don't know if that helps her or just helps me." "Write to her," Ellie said. "After Cheyenne, write to her and tell her." She met his eyes across the fire. People who are waiting for news deserve to receive it, even when the news is just that someone kept their promise. He looked at her steadily for a long moment. "You're going to be all right," he said. It was not a question or a comfort. It was an assessment, delivered with the same directness he gave everything. "I know," she said, and she meant it in a way she had not meant anything in a very long time. Not as a performance of courage, but as a genuine statement of fact, arrived at through evidence. She was going to be all right, because she had built the evidence that would hold her father accountable, and because she had gotten it to Cheyenne, and because she was 2 days' ride from a lawyer
who was expecting her, and because sitting across this fire from her was a man who had told her the truth every single time she had asked for it. She slept better than she had expected, rolled in the blanket Wade had thought to bring from the boarding house, and woke before dawn with the cold sharp on her face and the sense of something clarified, the way certain things clarify in sleep that the waking mind keeps too busy to resolve. They were back on the road before the sun was properly up. It was mid-morning of the second day, with Cheyenne showing on the horizon as a thin, dark line of civilization against the pale plain, when they heard hoofbeats behind them again. Ellie felt it before she heard it, that particular change in Wade's posture beside her, the specific stillness that preceded his assessments. She did not wait for him to speak. "How many this time?" she said. "2." He turned back to the front. "Riding hard." 2 men riding hard on the same road from Deadwood. The probability that this was coincidence was not one she was willing to calculate. "How far to Cheyenne?" she asked. 40 minutes at a controlled pace, 20 at a run." "Can the sorrel run?" "She can." He looked at her. "Can you stay on?" She thought about everything she had stayed on for 24 years. A running horse was the least of it. "Yes," she said. "Then we don't wait to find out who they are." He moved the gray closer to her. "Stay beside me. When I say go, we go. Don't look back, don't slow down, aim for the main street, and don't stop until we reach the lawyer's office." He held her eyes. "Price's office is on Ferguson Street, 2nd block north of the rail depot. Red door. You can find it." "I can find it," she said. The hoofbeats behind them were louder now. "Go," Wade said. She gave the sorrel her heels, and the horse lunged forward into a full gallop with a power that knocked the breath from her chest and flattened her forward over the neck, and the world collapsed into wind and hoofbeats and the hard-packed road unrolling ahead of her. She heard Wade beside her, and then slightly behind her, placing himself between her and what was coming, and she did not look back, because he had told her not to, and because looking back was something she had made a decision about, and the decision was final. Cheyenne came toward her fast. The thin, dark line on the horizon became buildings, and then streets, and then people scattering from the road as 2 riders came in at a dead run, and she was looking for the rail depot, finding it, turning north, counting blocks, looking for red. There, 2nd block, red door. She pulled the sorrel up hard in front of it, and was off the horse before it fully stopped, her legs barely holding under her, and she hit the door with her palm and pushed through into a room that smelled of paper and ink and the particular dusty order of a working lawyer's office. A man looked up from behind a desk, mid-50s, wire spectacles, with the unhurried expression of someone interrupted in the middle of careful work. "Price," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. "My name is Eleanor Cross. Bert Halliday delivered a package to you 2 days ago." Something shifted in his face. Recognition, and behind it, the particular alertness of a man who understood that the person standing in front of him was the origin point of what he had been holding. "He did," Price said. He was already standing. "I have additional documentation." She turned as Wade came through the door behind her, the canvas bag in his hand, and he set it on Price's desk without preamble. "There are men behind us," Wade said. 2 riders, out of Deadwood, connected to a man named Gerald Reeves. Price took off his spectacles. "I know that name." "Then you know this needs to move today," Wade said. "Not tomorrow. Today." Price looked at the bag. He looked at Ellie. He looked at Wade. He was the kind of man who made assessments quickly, and did not waste time once he had made them. She had trusted that about him from the 2 letters he had written her, the precision and economy of his language. And standing in front of him now, she found the reality matched the impression exactly. "I'll be at the marshal's office within the hour," he said. He put his spectacles back on and reached for the bag. "Both of you stay off the main street until I get back." The back room of Price's office was small and had 2 chairs and a window onto an interior courtyard. And Ellie sat in one chair and Wade sat in the other, and they waited with the particular quality of waiting that exists after everything possible has been done, and the outcome is now in other hands. It was the hardest kind of waiting there was. Ellie had always been better at doing than waiting. Her 14 months of careful work had been a form of action, a way of refusing to be passive in her own story. Sitting still while the last move played out required a different kind of discipline. "Do you think Doyle followed us into town?" she asked. "Probably," Wade said. "But following and acting are different things in a territorial capital. Deadwood has no law worth mentioning. Cheyenne has a marshal's office, a district court, and enough federal presence to make a man think twice about doing something visible." He looked at the window. "Doyle won't move against us openly here. He'll report to Reeves and wait for instruction. And by the time instruction comes, Price will have already been to the marshal," he said. "Yes," she absorbed this. "And my father." Wade was quiet for a moment. "The documentation you gathered covers criminal activity in the Dakota Territory. That's federal jurisdiction. The marshal here has authority to act." He paused. "Your father will be arrested, Ellie. Not today, probably. They'll need to ride north. But within the week." She had known this was the outcomes he was building toward for 14 months. She had known it with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who had decided that the right thing and the difficult thing were the same thing, and had proceeded accordingly. And still, hearing it stated plainly in a quiet room in Cheyenne, she felt the specific weight of it. Not regret, nothing close to regret, but the gravity of a thing that was both correct and irreversible. "James Garfield will be free of the debt," she said. "Yes." "And the other 17 families?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Then it's right." Price returned in 55 minutes. He came through the back door of his office rather than the front, which told her something about how seriously he was taking the presence of Doyle somewhere in the city. He sat down across from them and folded his hands on the desk. "The marshal has the documents," he said. "He's read the Reeves transfer records and the cross-operational records and the witness statement from Agnes Voss." He looked at Ellie with an expression she read as something between professional respect and genuine human recognition. He said, and I am quoting him directly, that this is the most organized and complete private investigation he has received in 12 years in this office. Ellie said nothing. "He's issuing warrants today. Reeves first. There's an existing federal interest there that your documents have now given teeth. Cross second, in conjunction with the Dakota Territory. Doyle, if he can be located." Price paused. "He also wants to speak with both of you directly. Not today. Today he's moving too fast to stop. But within the week, when his deputies return from Deadwood." "We'll be here," Wade said. Price looked at him. "There's one more thing." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded paper, which he held out to Wade. A letter. It arrived 3 days ago, forwarded through the court system from Cheyenne's records office. It's addressed to Wade Callister, in care of the Witness Coordination File. Wade took it. He looked at the handwriting on the outside for a long moment without opening it. Ellie watched him and said nothing because this was his moment, and she understood the value of being given space inside your own moments. He unfolded it. He read it. The process took less than a minute, but what happened in his face during that minute was complex and quiet and private, and she watched only enough to know He was all right. And then looked at the courtyard through the window to give him the rest. "It's from Sarah," he said finally. His voice was even, but something in the evenness was constructed, carefully held. "Thomas's girl." She heard through the court system that the case was moving again. She wrote to say... He stopped. Started again. She wrote to say she's glad someone kept going, that Thomas would be glad. He folded the paper. "That's all." "That's not a small thing," Ellie said quietly. "No," he said, "it isn't." They were given a room above Price's office that night. 2 rooms, connected by a shared sitting area, with solid locks on both interior doors, and a lawyer sleeping below who had, in the space of one afternoon, become one of the most useful human beings Ellie had ever encountered. She washed the road off her face and hands, and sat by the window and listened to Cheyenne going about its evening, which was a different sound from Deadwood's evening. Less feverish, more established. The sound of a place that had decided it was going to exist for a long time, and was behaving accordingly. There was a knock at the connecting door. "Come in," she said. Wade opened the door and leaned against the frame. He had cleaned up too, and looked, without the road dust and the urgency, like simply a man, large and quiet, and carrying something, the way people who have been through things carry them, not visibly, but persistently. "How are you?" he asked. It was a simple question, and she gave it the honest answer it deserved. "I don't entirely know yet," she said. "I've been moving toward this for 14 months, and now I've arrived, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel." "You don't have to feel anything in particular," he said. "You did what you set out to do. That's enough for tonight." "Agnes Voss," she said. "I need to make sure she's protected when the marshal's deputies arrive in Deadwood. She's a witness." "I already spoke to Price about it," he said. "He's sending a letter north tonight with a rider. Her name is on the list of protected witnesses." She looked at him. This was what he did. He handled the things she was still thinking about before she had finished thinking about them. Not because he was trying to manage her, but because he thought the way she thought. Forward and practical, and with an eye on the people who would otherwise be left behind by the main narrative of events. She had noticed this about him in Ruth's kitchen, watching him consider Agnes Voss as a person with a role and a risk rather than a logistical detail. She had noticed it again on the road, when he put himself between her and what was behind them without being asked, and without making a production of it. "Wade," she said. "Yeah?" "What do you do now, after Cheyenne? After the testimony and the trial?" She held his eyes. "You said you've been moving between places for years. Wyoming, Kansas, Missouri. You said you don't stay." He was quiet. He looked at the window behind her, then back at her face. "I've been thinking about that," he said. And I think the reason I didn't stay was that there was nothing to stay for that was worth the wait of stopping." He said it simply, without drama, the way he said things that were true. A town is just a place until it has something in it that matters to you. Then it becomes somewhere. He paused. "I haven't had a somewhere in a long time." She looked at him steadily across the small room. Outside, Cheyenne went on making its settled, forward-looking sounds. Somewhere in the marshal's office, warrants were being written for the men who had built walls around the people she was responsible for, and the man who had built walls around her. Agnes Voss was being added to a list of protected witnesses. Clara Dawson's little brother was somewhere south of Deadwood, working for his keep on a farm, not yet knowing that the debt that had taken his sister was about to be reckoned with. There was still work to do. There would be testimony and a trial, and the long, complicated work of rebuilding a life in a place that had not yet existed for her, but would. Some town, some work, some version of herself that was not defined by the walls she had learned to navigate around. All of that was true and real and waiting. But this was also true and real. This man in the doorway who had come through a window in the dark and told her the truth, and placed himself between her and everything that was coming for her, without once asking her to be smaller than she was. "Cheyenne is a reasonable place to practice staying," she said. Something moved in his face, that thing she had learned to watch for, the shift before the expression committed itself, and this time it committed fully, and it was not almost a smile. It was a real one, complete, reaching everything. "That's practical," he said. "I'm a practical person," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "It's one of my favorite things about you." She did not look away from that. She let it sit between them the way she had learned to let true things sit, without deflecting, without diminishing, without rushing forward or stepping back. She had spent 24 years making herself invisible, and she was done with the practice. Being seen clearly by someone who looked at her the way Wade Callister looked at her was not something to step back from. It was something to step toward, deliberately, with open eyes and full knowledge of what she was choosing. "Get some sleep," she said. "Price said the marshal wants us both fresh for the deposition." "First thing tomorrow," Wade agreed. He started to pull the door closed, then stopped. "Ellie." "Yes?" "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think Agnes Voss is going to hear what happened to Clara Dawson. I think when this is done, there are going to be answers that people have been waiting for." He paused. "You built that. Not just the case, the possibility of answers. That matters more than you know." She held his gaze one more moment. Then she said, "I know it matters. That's why I didn't stop." He nodded once, that simple, sufficient nod that was his version of everything that didn't need more words, and closed the door. She sat by the window until the lamp burned low. She thought about her mother, who had whispered about a piece of land that was insurance, that was escape, that was the shape of a life she never managed to reach. She thought about the tin cavity behind the wall, and the 14 months of stolen minutes, and Agnes Voss's red hands signing her name to a statement that was now in a marshal's hands. She thought about Bert Halliday riding through the night with everything pressed against his chest, keeping a promise to a woman he barely knew, because Ruth had asked him to, and because some people, when it comes to it, simply do the right thing. She thought about a man on the other side of a door who had come into her father's shop looking for the same thing she was looking for, and had not once, in 3 days of contingencies and closed roads and the particular pressure of danger, asked her to be less than she was. Eleanor Cross had spent 24 years learning to exist within walls. She had spent 14 months learning to dismantle them, quietly and carefully and with complete determination. And she had spent 3 days learning something she had not known she was missing. That courage is not only the solitary thing, the private endurance, the single figure working alone in the dark. Sometimes, courage is the thing that happens when 2 people decide to move in the same direction and trust each other enough to take the lead when they know the way. Outside, Cheyenne held the darkness without fear, a city that had decided it was permanent, that its roots went deep enough to hold. Somewhere north, in the morning, deputies would ride for Deadwood with warrants and the weight of 14 months of careful work behind them. Somewhere, in a locked marshal's office, documents with her handwriting on them were doing the work she had built them to do. And in a room above a lawyer's office on Ferguson Street, Eleanor Cross finally slept without listening for footsteps. For the first time in 24 years, there was nothing coming that she had not already prepared for. The walls were down. The road was open. And the life that had always been hers, unhurried now, uncontained, belonging entirely to herself, was waiting just on the other side of morning, ready to begin.